Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I'm going to do my May reading wrap up, and May is the month where it starts to look like my reading dips a bit, but it doesn't. I am a judge again in the self-published fantasy blog off, and while the competition technically opens on the 1st of June, it opens for submissions partway through May, and we get our books to start reading shortly after submission closes. So I have already started reading the books on my list for SPFBO, which means that even though I read 9 books this month, 3 of them are not going to appear on this wrap up. I do all of those completely separately. I don't want to give away my thoughts, what books I enjoyed, what books I'm cutting, until they appear on their own video. So I'm going to be showing you 6 books today, and most importantly, I finally got to the Margaret Atwood reread. I started with Oryx and Craig this month. Snowman, known as Jimmy before the plague overwhelmed Earth, may well be the last human alive. He is just trying to survive. But while mourning the loss of his best friend and his loved ones, he seems to be responsible now for the green-eyed children of Craig. I really enjoyed this reread, and I don't know why I put it off, because it's such an absorbing world. It's so fascinating. This world is completely ruled by biotech. Before everything happens, it's become a corporate world. There's all different compounds where people live, and it's just that company. The corporations own and bioengineer anything that is possible to be done that way, and it is dangerous to be outside the compounds. This is told in 2 timelines. We have the present time and the time before, and Margaret Atwood plays nicely with tenses to differentiate the two. It's absolutely absorbing, chaotic and vivid, and I gave it 4 stars once again on my reread. So following on from that quite rapidly, I went to my reread of Year of the Flood. The waterless flood has ended the world, and 2 women have survived. Wren, a young dancer trapped in the club that she worked, and Toby, who waits in her gardens and watches. This is another one that jumps backwards and forwards, and it really serves to flesh out the world that we began to experience in book 1. We learn a lot more about the gardeners, and we do spend a lot of time with them, learning about how things work for them. Toby and Wren are really interesting characters to follow. They are both so strong and resourceful. Of course, there is horror in this world, but it is a world that draws you in, and I gave this one 4 out of 5. So it's time to complete the trilogy. I bought a copy of Madhatum earlier on in the year because I had planned to actually get to those 2 rereads. Madhatum is more of a direct sequel to the second book, whereas the first book stands a little bit further apart. It carries on the story that we started in book 2, but the characterizations have become so disappointing. I'm not going to say a lot, but the strength I admired in book 2 is completely absent. There are some interesting stories and characters that we meet and explore about the world, but I gave it 3 out of 5. Just did not. I wasn't as charmed with this one. Although, can you be charmed with such a horrific world? I don't know. I enjoyed the first 2 books so much more. I then decided to have a bit of a change of pace, and I went for the Lefthanded Booksellers of London by Garth Nix, because I wanted something that was going to be a little bit faster, although this ended up taking me longer to read than I anticipated. In a slightly alternative London in 1983, Susan Arkshaw is searching for her father. Crime boss Frank Thringley, which is a bit of a mouthful to say, may have been able to help her, but he has just been turned to dust in front of her eyes by Merlin, one of the left-handed booksellers of London. Together with the right-handed booksellers, they police the mythic old world, one that is now beginning to encroach on the new world. Honestly, while this was fun, it didn't really stand out a lot plot-wise to me. There were some really interesting characters, but at the end of it I just felt like that was a thing I read and it was okay. The world setup was interesting, and I really enjoyed how it was revealed to us, but things just felt a little bit flat, which was disappointing considering how much I loved his Sabriel series. It was proper gory at times. I gave this one 3 out of 5. And then I read this chunk, Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I had been reading this on and off since March because I've been reading it on my Kindle, not the physical copy. And it was the book that I read if I was waiting somewhere or on a break or something, so it did take me a while to get through, but I was determined to get this finished before I started my SPFBO reading, and I did. Life in Emond's Fields has been pretty boring for Randall Thor and his friends, up until that is a strange woman appears who brings stories of evil stirring in the wider world. One night when Trollocs attack and Emond's Fields burns, Moraine and her warrior garden rescue Rand and his friends. They may be far more important to the fate of the world than they could have possibly imagined. Okay, so I bought this a few years back. It was actually on my TBR challenge. In the early 2000s, I read and reread the first, up to the first 10, I think it was. And then I didn't finish the series. And I've decided that it was time... Excuse me, Spencer, I'm recording. And then I decided it was time to come back to this, especially after the Amazon series was announced, which is when I was going to have read this one beforehand. This is not a priority plan. I am just going to dip in and out of these books as I see fit, because they are chunky things. And it was nice to be back in this world. It was so familiar. From the very first page, it felt so familiar and comforting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the story ends this time, because I didn't get that far before. I did give it 4 out of 5. It is quite derivative. There's almost point for point where you can match it up to the plot of Lord of the Rings, but it explores the world and becomes its own thing later on. Anyway, I'm looking forward to it. The final book I read was Amongst Our Weapons by Ben Aranovich, and I've really got to angle this away because it's so shiny. I'm not going to talk about this one a lot because this is the 9th of the Rivers of London, and there's also novellas, and I think there's a novella coming soon. It would really spoil the plot if I talked about really anything that happened in this one, but basically this is another series I adore. I read them as soon as they come out and I love them, and it's wonderful being back in this world. I gave this 4 out of 5, which is pretty much what I've given almost every entry. So yeah, I'm excited to see where things go now. As a general overview, there had been a couple of books where I felt like the background story had paused, but it moves on again nicely with this one. So definitely interesting things about to happen in this world. So those were the 6 relevant books that I read this month. I did read more. I would love to know what you read this month. Thanks for watching, and I shall see you all soon.